Welcome to the Remembering and Re-enchanting podcast. My name is Sara Jolena Wolcott. I am your hostess, and I am so delighted today to be joined here in the studio with John Seed and Niamh Murray. And we're going to be talking about deep ecology. I'm really honored to have both of them on as guests today. And I actually thought it'd be kind of fun to start with a story about how I first heard about John's work. And I was probably in my early 20s, and I was at a workshop, a Work That Reconnects workshop, 10-day workshop led by Joanna Macy. And at that point, I was quite unfamiliar with much of this work. Had not worked with her before, or this work before, and hadn't done a lot of reading. And she told a story, about this man on the other side of the world, far, far away from where we were gathered in the mountains in California, who one day was protecting a rainforest from destruction. And there was a moment in that protection when he thought that he was going to be protecting the rainforest, and then he realized that he was actually part of the rainforest protecting itself. And that story stayed with me and helped to shape almost everything that I do. And that story was about a man named John Seed, and I'm just so delighted to be with you here now in this space. So thank you, John.
Thank you. What a beautiful introduction, Sarah.
And I just, and we were talking about this, and we were talking about the possibility of whether or not we want to bring someone else into the conversation, because sometimes it's really fun to triangulate things. We talked about, John really wanted to bring a younger person, and he asked Niamh to join us. So, Niamh, thank you again for joining us today in this conversation.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
I'm actually wondering, John, you can kind of take us back to those early days and tell us a story about what is it that for you, and like maybe a little bit of the bigger story of that snapshot that I just gave of what enabled this. We can really think of it as a shift in consciousness, a shift in identity, a shift in understanding of who you are and who we are in our species. Who are we?
Well, it's 50 years ago, and so having told the story many times, it's hard to remember the event. But I was living as a sort of a hippie, Buddhist, back to the land farmer in northern New South Wales, Australia, in what had been the big scrub, the largest subtropical rainforest in the world, but less than 1% of it remained after logging and clearing for agriculture. And we'd built a Buddhist meditation centre, and we're organising meditation retreats and building our own houses, delivering our own babies, growing our food. And I thought I was going to spend my life like that when a neighbour one day appealed for help, saying that the Forestry Commission was coming in the next day to log the rainforest at the end of Terania Creek Road, and could we please help to stop them? So I didn't know what a rainforest was. I didn't know there were rainforests in Australia. I'd never been to the end of Terania Creek Road. That was only a few miles from where I'd been living. But I was into supporting the neighbourhood, and so out, curiosity and neighbourliness, I went along, and I guess I was smitten that somehow being in the midst of what I gradually came to learn was the original biota of Australia that had been a refuge for rainforest for 100 million years as the rainforest expanded and contracted due to climate change over all of those immense deep time. Terania Creek was one of the places where the rainforest had persisted throughout the whole time, and represented this later, realised this incredible intelligence. But anyway, I was there in the very heightened circumstances of standing on the line between the wild nature and humanity, but standing not as humanity with an eye to conquest and profit, but standing there to prevent that. And suddenly everything changed. My whole life changed in a moment. And at first I was bewildered and frightened. There was nothing in my conceptual framework that would allow for this. I wondered about my mental health, but the experience was so warm and intimate and friendly and undeniable that I quickly surrendered and ran away with that circus of rainforest protection, and eventually that led me to, just a love of the earth itself, and a realisation that everything that I had believed in up to that point was itself a tiny blossom on this ancient earth, and that the human being, the personality, the ego that I identified with was just the tiniest fragment of this vast life. And I've tried to represent that ever since.
Mm. Mm. As you're speaking, I'm just feeling both the repetition of the story, but the ripples of those 50 years of the dedication of that moment and the devotion to lean into that warmth, and to lean into that sense of interbeingness. I'm just like curious, like looking back now over the expansiveness of that time. Has your sense of being part of the forest grown, and how has it grown, or what does it feel like for it to have grown?
I'm not sure that it's grown. I sort of feel like I got the whole thing immediately, and if anything, the immediacy of it has faded. It's like I feel like on that day I hitched my wagon to a star, and I've just been holding on for dear life ever since. And I found that through meeting dear Joanna Macy, especially, I was able to find other ways of experiencing that connection and of sharing that connection with other people. And it just feels now as though that, in a way, the ceremony of direct action, because it can't be, you can't save the planet by standing in front of one particular forest. The only thing that can save us is a vast change in consciousness where human beings recognize who we really are underneath all of the clamour of the ego and the social identity. And so these days I feel much more that sense of connection floods into me through ceremony with other humans than it does through wild nature as it did back then.
Can you give an example of that?
Well, I'm wondering, Niamh, you have a much fresher, sort of newer experience of this. Do you want to step in with, you've co-facilitated those ceremonies with me, and I believe will continue to do so.
Yes, yeah. Thanks. Well, I think it's like you say, John, that it can be easy to forget. We tend to, we come together in ceremony, for example, at your deep ecology retreats, and then we go back to our normal lives and get sucked into that world again. And we need that consistent coming together, being in circle, being in ceremony, remembering our place on the earth, communing with the more than human world. And as you say, and as I've learned, and probably many people listening know, that is what indigenous cultures did, on a daily or other basis. So that's what all of our kind of ancestors would have done, and
many still do.
Yeah, yes, exactly. So yeah, I think there is time for that kind of lonesome contemplation in nature, but I think we've forgotten that coming together, and holding hands with each other is a different kind of medicine that's just as if or if not more important.
Can you give a story of a ceremony that you've both been engaged with? What does that look like?
Well, maybe I'll jump in with my favourite at the moment. So I facilitate, along with Niamh and others, experiential deep ecology, which is also called the work that reconnects. And the first thing to say is that the particular processes that we use are not the point. That it turns out that whenever a group of people comes together with the shared intention to heal the illusion of separation, that we are somehow other than the living earth, it's that intention that does all the heavy lifting, and it hardly matters what you do after that. That there are endless processes, rituals, ceremonies that are congruent with that will do the work of giving us the incredible uplifting experience of reconnection with the earth and with each other. But having said that, my favourite is what we call the cosmic walk, and this is a process devised by Sister Miriam Therese McGillis, a Catholic nun who started a community called Genesis Farm in New Jersey, and she was a colleague and friend of the late Thomas Berry, who was perhaps the most famous of the progressive Catholic theologians of his age, the latter half of the last century. And Thomas discovered quite late in his life that he was no longer a theologian but had become a geologian, and he understood that the creation myth that he had adhered to all of his life, which is the Old Testament and the New Testament, that this was just one of 10,000 stories that human beings tell to try and explain who we are and how we come to be here, and that each of these is just a tiny blossom on the vast tree of life, and they all spring from the earth. And so he realized that all of these 10,000 creation myths, as beautiful as they are, tend to be at war with each other. That it's not just that I have a story and you have a story, but that I have the true story, and that your story makes you a heathen or a pagan or some other derogatory term. And Thomas said that it's too late for that, that we now need a story that will unite humanity and not separate us. And he proposed that it's the story revealed by empiricism, revealed by the scientific method, the story of cosmology, the story of the evolution of life on Earth. But he said, we can't leave it to the scientists to tell that story, that in order to function as a creation myth, it needs to be numinous, it needs to fill us with awe and wonder. And so he called upon the poets and the artists and the mystics to tell the story, and Sister Miriam was one of those who responded with this ceremony that's called the Cosmic Walk. And in the Cosmic Walk, we build a spiral, and in our workshops, it's a ball of hemp that's 50 metres long in a spiral, and along this ball of hemp are 23 beads placed appropriately so that this 50 metres represents the 13.7 billion years that cosmology tells us has elapsed since the beginning of this universe. And each bead represents a story in the emerging universe. And the process consists of, we learn a chant together called Child of the Universe, and the chorus is, I am as old as the universe, I've been here before and I'll be here again. I am a child of the universe, part of all women and part of all men. And so next to each of the beads in this spiral is a tea light candle, and then the youngest person in our group will walk around the spiral, first lighting the candle at the centre, which represents the Big Bang or the flaring forth of the universe. And here we tell the story of the amazing fact that anything exists at all. And we wonder at the fact of existence in the first place. And then she or he lights a taper from that candle, and as we chant, she walks around the spiral, lighting candle after candle, and story after story is told of the emerging universe, of the emerging of the periodic table of elements, of galactic formation, of the supernova explosion, that the debris from which created our sun and solar system, and then to life and the amazing transformations of life on Earth. And that story is told not just as the universe within which we live, but rather that we see that each of us, the human, is that moment when the universe has become conscious of itself in a certain way, where the universe has become conscious of its own story and of this incredible trail that it has trod. And we just recognize that every cell in my body is descended in an unbroken chain through all of these events that we're describing, and this expansion of identity takes place. Deep ecology was a term that was coined by the late Arnie Ness, the professor of philosophy at Oslo University, and he said that ecological ideas won't save us, that what we need is ecological identity or ecological self. And he called for community therapies to nourish that ecological identity. And so the cosmic walk and all of the processes that we do are an attempt to generate that ecological identity, to perform those community therapies or ceremonies that lead us to a clearer understanding of who we really are.
Niamh, do you have anything you want to add to that, or your experience of that?
Oh, the cosmic walk. Yeah, that's a really popular one, and I just love that phrase. We are the universe looking back on itself. It makes me tingly and giddy because it's just all so vast. But I'd say my favorite is the Council of All Beings, which is the practice that Joanna and John created together. And I think the first time I heard about it, I was terrified. I was like, ugh, role play, like absolutely not. That's something I would never do. And that was about 2 years ago. And then about nearly a year ago, I was at John's weekend workshop, and it's just such a profound experience. To explain it for anyone that doesn't know, you are asked to go out into nature and find an ally or a being, and rather than find, kind of let it come to you, let it choose you. So whether that be, a type of tree, a type of animal, or whether it be, an element or a planet, can be anything. I think John said that people have even emulated plastic bags. So then we come into council, we make masks, and then we come into council and wear our mask, and then role play or act or speak as that being. And it's just such a profound experience. And I've only done I've done 3, but John says each one is totally different each time. And the ones that I've done, it's quite interesting because we're encouraged not to kind of speak too much about humans if possible, and really just focus on the beings in the circle. And it's just I've found that there can be a tendency to have that human mindset of trying to fix or trying to blame the humans, or that kind of rhetoric. But then we often find towards the end that that's not what nature does. Nature just is, and nature respects all, and nature doesn't blame or try to fix. It just is. And that's a really beautiful space to come to it at the end as well.
The last time I remember doing one of those exercises, particularly the Council of All Beings, there was just such a wide, people were so surprised by the phrases that came out of their mouths when they were embodying these different animals, and they really hadn't planned on what they said, whatever they would say. And they really could feel that animist world speaking through them and helping them, and it helped them shift their own sense of their identity. Is like, oh, I have access to something that's not just me or not just human. And not to say it's inherently correct, but that it's something that feels quite different, and that we have that when we go into these spaces, we can lean into a set of intelligences that's not simply our own. And I'm just like curious, like, how do you see that shifting people as you watch them engage in the work and take it out of the workshop spaces? How do you see that awareness? How do you see it impacting people's sense of self?
Well, one of the podcasts that I like a lot is Josh Schreier's The Emerald podcast, and one of the best episodes of that he calls Animism is Normative Consciousness. That is to say that in the last 300,000 years, 99.9% of our ancestors have been animist, that they have seen the world as alive. The world wasn't just a dead rock with resources growing on it the way that the dominant paradigm sees it today. So that means that when we create a matrix, a structure where that normative consciousness is given the opportunity to express itself, like the Council of All Beings and the other processes that we do, even though many of the people that are present in the circle have never done anything like this before, live entirely embedded in cities and so on, very quickly this ancient kind of knowledge sweeps through the circle and everybody shares that experience without exception. And so in terms of how that goes out into the world, it depends. That there are some people who come to the workshop on the cusp of a change and, just ready for a change and just needing that additional burst of energy. And so there are many stories of people who, come into the workshop as a marketing executive for a Fortune 500 company, and 12 months later they're, the direct action coordinator of Greenpeace, and so on. Many people use the energy of the workshop to create a change in their lives. But for most people, it's more difficult than that. One of the things that I warn people about in the final sharing circle on the Sunday is that although what we're sharing now is always this extraordinary numinous sense of connection and intimacy with each other and with the world, but it's as ineffable as a psychedelic, that you can it's so clear and so real that it's impossible to imagine that you could ever lose it, and yet just a few days later you're swept away by the real world, by life sweeps you away. And the only thing that remains is that you know that something else is possible and you know how to find it. So it's very important even then. But what I realise is that the reason why every indigenous society includes ceremonies that allow the people to experience the gratitude to all our relations, experience our rootedness in the living earth. The reason that they do this over and over again, many times in the course of the year, the whole society dropping the everyday and going into these ceremonies, is because you can't hold on to it. You have to just recreate it over and over and over again. And so now when I think of Arnie Ness's metaphor of a community therapy, it seems to me better to think of it as a kind of a cultural reclamation project, of a way of finding our way back to the animism that sees the world as alive. And in a way, so much of the science is coming to the same conclusion now. It just feels like perhaps we've been through an episode of a few centuries, and we're sort of perhaps coming out the other end of it.
Mm. Hmm. Hmm. Niamh, is that your experience?
Yes, certainly it feels like we're coming out the other end of something. The astrology that I follow is certainly saying the same thing. And yeah, I think I really like that term, cultural reclamation project. I think that's what it is. That's what, you know, people in these spaces, or people everywhere actually are searching for, is to remember. I mean, it's the name of your podcast, to remember and to re-enchant, to remember who we are, and to remember our joy and remember our love, and yeah, that to reclaim that. And I think that coming into circle is one of the best and strongest ways to do that, and to do it often.
I often say that almost every religious and faith and long standing cultural tradition speaks of some version of remembering and reconnecting. And in Islam, that says the human being is instructed to pray 5 times a day, because that is how often you forget Allah. That is how often you forget how much the divine loves you. And in order to remember it, you had to pray frequently. And in Christianity, you know, when Jesus says, eat this bread, my body, drink this blood, drink this wine, my blood, and do this in remembrance of me. I think the use of that term is very purposeful. It's like, it's an embodied somatic ecological experience. And that you need to, in the Christian tradition, you know, communion happens when people gather, and the Holy Spirit is felt amongst them. And you might need to have that experience frequently. You can't just do it once. It's not, you know, we may have mystical experiences that can stay with us our whole lives, but we have to keep recreating our place in the world in order to enact our place in the world. It's like it's an active, creative process. And it's why it's so important to be developing these communities and these spaces of practice that people can come to again and again and again. And certainly many people I know listening and who I work with are working on that, are working on developing ongoing communities of practice in various forms and shapes, out of recognition of the just the regularity needed for cultural reclamation. We need so much support in this process. We need each other again and again and again and again.
And I think we need to find the overlap between the ecological and the spiritual, and between the ecological and all of the different spiritual traditions and religious traditions of the world. That my own experience was a kind of a very like an epiphany, a conversion to a religion that I didn't even know existed at the time, you know. But if we look at Christianity or Judaism or Islam or Buddhism, all of them have elements that are recognizing the sacredness of the earth. And so Buddhism, which is perhaps the spiritual tradition that I'm the most familiar with and that I was steeped in for many years, there's one particular image which is of the Buddha touching the earth with his right hand, and the story that goes with it, or, you know, my version of that story, one version of that story, is that on the eve of his enlightenment, the Buddha was assailed once again by Mara, the demon of doubt, and Mara said to the Buddha, "By whose authority do you claim this so-called enlightenment?" And the Buddha's response was to touch the earth, and the earth roared out its assent. The earth claimed the Buddha as her own, that the Buddha was the enlightenment principle, and the earth claimed it, you know? And so to deep ecology, this story, the Buddha, is like this tiny shoot that if we look at the timeline of 13.7 billion years, the Buddha, this took place in the last fraction of a second before the present moment. And yet it's somehow an expression of the universe, just emerging and emerging and emerging. And all of the spiritual traditions have these points of connection. And so one of the things that, connects my activism with my deep ecology and with my Buddhism is a process that some friends and I started decades ago, which we called the Dharma Gaia Trust. So Dharma is the Buddha Dharma, Gaia is the goddess of earth, and the Dharma Gaia Trust was seeking projects by Buddhists, especially Buddhist clergy in Asia, that were bringing Buddhism together with the protection of nature and the veneration of nature, and finding funding for those projects from Buddhists in the West. And so, for example, in Thailand, there was a band of forest monks who found a way to protect the old-growth trees which were being threatened in those forests by ordaining the trees. They would wrap a piece of orange cloth around a tree, do the appropriate ceremony, and turn the tree into a monk. And the woodcutters wouldn't touch those trees. And so the Dharma Gaia Trust made sure that they always had tons of orange cloth, that they never ran out of orange cloth to ordain trees with. And, we've been funded reforestation projects of nuns in Bhutan and in Sri Lanka. One of the abbots of an ancient monastery had a sacred grove attached to the monastery, and there were trees growing in that grove that were extinct everywhere else in the world. They had been cut down. The only place that was sacred enough to protect these trees was this grove, and so we helped to expand his sacred grove. And in a similar way, we've tried to nourish the ecological shoots that are coming out of Judaism and Christianity and other religions.
I love those stories, and it's so important, both to find the financial, to support the financial dynamic of that, right? It's not with the shifts in consciousness that you have to have a resulting and accompanying shift in financial flows. It's very, very critically important. I'm really curious, like, how has your work evolved or developed for either of you to engage with Aboriginal people in Australia? I know that there's been so many voices from us, Aboriginal Australia, have reached the West in recent years, which has been quite exciting. I'm kind of curious, how has it been for you?
Have you got anything, Niamh, or shall I start?
No, you go.
Okay. So the story that comes to me, well, first of all, I want to say that I did a podcast with Tyson Yunkaporta, who's one of the current Aboriginal leaders and thought leaders, and his podcast, The Other Others, is highly recommended. But the story that comes to me goes back, nearly 50 years, when in northern New South Wales, where the hippies were in the 70s, were reclaiming this degraded farmland and building communities and so on, and where we built Bodhi Farm and the meditation centre, there was this old Aboriginal man that we knew, Uncle Lyle Thomas, and it was clear that the other Aboriginal people felt somehow there was some tension there, like we didn't know them, but you could just kind of feel it. And it turned out that there had been terrible massacres in the area, and most of the Aboriginal people just wanted to disappear into the wider community. And Uncle Lyle, it was his job to keep the sacred sites alive. So he had to continually visit and renew the sacred sites of his people, and this was creating some kind of tension, and it meant that the young Aboriginal men weren't ready to drive him to the places that he needed to go, because they were afraid. It was spooky and so on. And so a couple of the hippies became friends of Uncle Lyle's, and probably reluctantly, but he had no other choice, he would call them and they would drive him, take me to this cave, take me to this waterfall, and so on. And at a certain point they said to him, Uncle Lyle, the Forestry Commission wants to log your forest at Mount Nardi, and we don't think they should be allowed to do so. What do you think? And he replied, you better take me up there. So they drove him to the top of Mount Nardi, and he said, wait here. And he disappeared into the forest, they said, for hours. But when he came back, he said, take me to see John Bruce. And John Bruce was the chief of the forestry based in Casino, a town about an hour away. And so they drove him to Casino, and Uncle Lyle, who I should say was this tiny, wizened man, he was about 4'10", and he weighed nothing, like he was skinny, and he dressed like Jimmy Cagney in an old suit and an old hat. Anyway, he walked into the Forestry Commission office flanked by these two big young hippies, and he said to the girl behind the counter, get me John Bruce. And she blanched and scurried out the back, and they could hear conversations. And then John Bruce swaggered out with his, a Kubra hat on, and he said, how can I help you? And Uncle Lyle banged his fist on the counter and he said, get out of my forest, and turned on his heel and walked out. And, the two guys looked at each other and nodded their heads, and that was, how can I say, that was the authority that led to the action. That was where the authority for the action came from.
I can completely picture that as you're describing that story. Niamh, I'm curious if there's any stories you want to share.
Yeah, it's interesting because I have been reflecting on this lately, and I realized that I haven't really communed with Australia's Indigenous peoples in other than kind of more surface level settings. And I think that is, I think that's partly because I do spend a lot of time overseas, and that's kind of where I do my soul searching. And so I've spent time contemplating on a lot of the Indigenous peoples in, the Amazon or different parts of South and Central America. But I realized as I just a few weeks ago, like, oh, we have all these Indigenous elders here, and there is all this wisdom here. And so I think part of, I've always been so worldly and looking outside, looking beyond what's available to me here. And so I think part of my remembering and deeper, creating that ecological self is connecting with what's in arm's reach rather than always looking outside. And so that's part of the journey that I'm on. So I do hope to have more stories soon, and to be able to commune with and learn from the Indigenous peoples on the lands that that I'm so privileged to grow up on.
Mm. Mm. Yeah, I was taught that the indigenous peoples of the land I grew up on were no longer there. And like there was this very purposeful teaching of dismembering. And sometimes that was subtle and sometimes that was overt. And I remember being quite shocked and surprised to like, oh, actually there's a indigenous health clinic 25 minutes away from where I grew up and still going strong. And it's actually in plain sight, and I was taught not to see it. So I think part of the journey, part of the deep ecology journey, is learning to see differently, and that means seeing each other differently too, right? And seeing us, seeing past that which we've been taught to forget. And it's quite, I don't know, at least for me, it's been quite an exhilarating journey, and so much. It helped that I knew people from other parts of the world first. I think it helped me understand what I was listening to better. But it's a different journey. It's a different part of the journey, and it's a invaluable one that many people experience. And it's quite funny. Tyson tells a similar story, right? So like he tells a story that for him as an Aboriginal man, that when he was in Italy, he kind of just fell in love with Italy, like with all the traditional cultural practices of the old women who sit by the sacred well in the sacred fountain in the middle of the plaza every single afternoon, and have their gardens. And he kind of was romanced in some ways into traditional culture and into village life, from small villages in Italy, right? And it's like sometimes we need to see outside of our own place. And Alistair McIntosh tells them very similar stories from different parts of the world of like, oh, it is right here. And sometimes you can't see what's right in front of you, or sometimes it's very hard to see what's right in front of you. And then
beautiful.
So it's a really fun process.
I was just going to say I'm in good company with Alistair and Tyson then.
Yes.
That's
For
right.
sure.
Yes.
Yeah, for sure. And I just keep thinking, like here in America, we are in the midst, our culture, my country is in the midst of attempting even more and more forgetting, and like this sort of full on, like it's not even superficial ecology, like it's like, and the progress made in science is just getting like completely defunded, right? It's not even that the alternatives are getting defunded, is that the mainstream science is getting defunded. And it's a very painful process to be witnessing and in part like caught up in, as so many of us are. And I'm so curious, like what do you I remember, one of the hopeful things that I heard that Joanna used to say a long time ago was, and I think she's been saying it, has not stopped saying this, is like the empire gets stronger, and the green shoots grow stronger, that both these things happen at the same time. And I'm kind of just curious, like when you look at this from the great vantage point of the other side of the world, like what do you see, like how are you interpreting what feels like just this complete ignoring of everything that we've learned in the last 60 years? Like it like how are you interpreting and seeing this moment that seems to be overtaking? I mean, I wish it was only in the United States, and I know it's not. I know it's happening in many parts of the world, that the voices of disconnection seem to be growing. And like I'm just curious, like how do you interpret that?
Well, I mean, for me, I'm totally in shock, as I think everyone in the world is in shock, and it's impossible to see where this is going to go, And Joanna spoke about the great unraveling, and that's clearly accelerating in these events that are taking place, especially in the United States. But alongside the great unraveling is what she calls the great turning away from the industrial growth society and towards a life-affirming society. And I feel like that as the great unravelling makes business as usual more and more ludicrous. It's impossible to imagine that business as usual can continue. That sort of goads people and prods people into, I think more and more people are realising that there's no alternative but to engage in the great turning. And Joanna identifies three different kind of positions of the great turning, that there's the holding actions of protecting whatever we can of the ancient, sacred, spiritual, ecological things, the landscapes, the languages, the indigenous, the things that are being lost. The second is creating the structural change, the systems change, creating the new institutions and the new forms, even while the tail of the dinosaur thrashes around us, building the new in the midst of the chaos. And finally, there's the work on consciousness itself, deep ecology and other ways of trying to midwife transformations of consciousness that are needed. I just want to add that Alistair McIntosh is an old friend, and when you mentioned his name, what came back to me was a time 30 years ago when he visited Australia and came to the Rainforest Information Centre, which was the non-government organisation that I helped to start for protecting the world's rainforests, and he gave us a course at the meditation centre in the forest, which he called bookkeeping as a far-out spiritual experience. That was the course that he led us on.
I love it. I can totally see that. He's a friend, and some of our listeners have heard some of our podcasts with our episodes with him on education, the continual process of education. Niamh, what are you seeing? What are you saying when you look at this moment?
Yeah, I mean, also a lot of shock and despair, but I think paying attention to astrology and some of the prophecies and whatnot that exist helps to, it's a shock, but it's not a surprise necessarily, what's happening in the world. And yeah, I think it just encourages me to go deeper into this work, because it's, I mean, as John said in the beginning, it's a crisis in consciousness that we're facing. It's a crisis in consciousness that is causing all of this disruption and all of the terrible things that go along with it. And so it's a change in consciousness that is going to change the world. And so it really, encourages me to buckle down and to do what I can to be a piece of the puzzle that helps us remember our humanity and create that ecological self and remember ourselves as part of an ecosystem. Yeah, that's what I feel called to do in this moment.
Perhaps I can just speak to that change of consciousness with some thoughts that it seems to me that consciousness must evolve. That there was a time when, this kind of consciousness that we experience today didn't exist, that it evolved, and that most likely it evolved according to the same kind of principles or rules that govern the rest of organic evolution, natural selection, and that natural selection is based upon environmental pressure, that there are species of sharks that haven't changed in 100 million years because there's been no reason to change, that without the environmental pressure, the change doesn't take place. So what does environmental pressure on consciousness looks like? And it seems to me that extinction is the ultimate environmental pressure. And so what that suggests is that it's really important for us to actually contemplate, to look at extinction, maybe the equivalent of the Buddhist teaching that meditation in graveyards is a really good way to proceed spiritually, not forgetting one's own death, not forgetting the fact that, that there's something very precious happening at the moment. And so that means that the process that perhaps is the most important part of the deep ecology and work that reconnects is what Joanna now calls honouring our pain for the world, of going against the cultural norm that we don't talk about these things and that we never share our deepest feelings of anguish and rage and terror about what we see happening around us. And so in our workshops, we sit in circle and we remember these things and we listen to each other's experience, and this very, very profound change takes place and is followed by what Joanna calls seeing with new eyes, that when we allow ourselves to feel the pain, then the scales fall away from our eyes and we're able to see the universe afresh.
And the importance of doing that collectively. Like we can do some of that we can do by ourselves, but again, going back to come gather in circle once again.
Well, I heard a recent study where a difficult problem was given to a large number of people, so difficult that only about 10% were able to solve the problem. However, when the same problem was given to small groups of people, 80% of those groups were able to solve the problem, because we're a social species and we're not meant to be solving difficult problems by ourselves, that this is something that's done in a circle, that this is something that's done in community. And so to me, the most important thing that anybody can do at the moment is to join together in person if possible, but virtually if necessary, with like-minded people and like-hearted people, and look at the most difficult problems together.
Remind me if were there poems that you bring, John? Did you bring a poem or something else that you wanted to read or share?
Yeah, I'd love to share a poem that we often start the workshops with, and that deep ecology is better expressed through poetry than more prosaic means. And so what I'd like to do is to share a poem and then a process. So the poem is, it's called The Universe Jam. The flame has lit up the world from within. All things, individually and collectively, are interpenetrated and flooded by it. You who mould the manifold so as to breathe your life into it, I pray to you. The first verse of the universe pours forth like a sea of mystery. Out of the void, unmanifest silence. Space-time comes into existence, unseen shaping, swirling, unfurling. Hydrogen, helium, divine is revealed within galactic whirlpools as energy flows in. A star collapses, supernova explosion, a cloud of cosmic debris. Drawn together by gravity, by the mystery of attraction, primordial bonding, universe action, stardust swirling, swarming gases, organizing and forming masses. See, the sun is the one that spun the 9 others, give birth to Mother Earth and her sisters and brothers. Mercury, Venus, Mars and Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune and Pluto, everyone is the sun. The sun is the one. Everyone. Everybody better wake up. And the earth gave birth to continents and oceans, shaping and shaking in waves of emotion, crashes of lightning, bombarding and striking, exposing the globe as it glows like a strobe, and setting the stage for the first cell of life. So simple, so basic, so primal that I place it at the top of the chain from which all life sprang. More forms adorn the earth as they bring diversity dispersing the song of creation. Ring in the dawn, sing along in celebration. I just want to celebrate life. I just want to celebrate Earth. I just want to celebrate the cosmos. I just want to celebrate. The sea comes alive, starts to thrive with new life forms. Storms swept the planet, plants crept on granite enchanted by the sun's solar power. The earth gave birth to green leaves and flowers. Lava flows, mountains rose, tropical islands, forests and meadows, fed by the freshwater streams, the veins, heavenly rains drain back to the sea. The fish are set free as they swim onto sand. Fins turn to limbs and they limp onto land. Amphibians, reptiles, new styles of creature, seeing through new being the range of her features. The earth, your mother, gave birth to eyesight, looking within as she spins in the sunlight. On to the dawn, to the day of the dinosaur. Pterodactyl soars, Tyrannosaurus rex, towering, devouring, so who's up next? Mammals and primates, all life interrelated, divinely created. So don't you think it's time we celebrated? I just want to celebrate life. I just want to celebrate Earth. I just want to celebrate the cosmos. I just want to celebrate. So that's the Universe Jam by Drew Dellinger, one of Joanna Macy's favourite poets, and I'd just like to honour Joanna Macy at this moment, who's just in liminal space, in transition on her deathbed, and bringing a vast web of people who love her together. It's incredible to watch the social media explosion of connections and memories and love of Joanna that's taking place at the moment. So if we've got time, Sarah, I'd love to share
please.
a process. So most of the processes that we do in the experiential deep ecology work are done in circle. And, we started this in order to give substance to Arnie Ness's call for community therapies, of working in community. But there's one process which I found to be really useful and that doesn't need other people. And so anybody who's listening, if you're in a position to do so, move to somewhere where you can see a living plant. It could be a pot plant, the table, or it could be by opening the window and looking at a lawn or a tree outside. This process involves consciously exchanging gases with the green world, remembering that the oxygen that we breathe and that we need to stay alive is being produced by those green things, that they capture photons of light from the sun and use the energy of that light to break carbon dioxide in order to extract the carbon from their bodies, and in doing so they release oxygen. And that we breathe that oxygen in and release carbon dioxide, that this ancient cycle of partnership which has been going on between us and the green world for literally billions of years, we add consciousness to that. So just for a couple of minutes, what I'd like you to do is that with each out-breath, feel a sense of generosity and giving, that in spite of the bad rap that CO2 has these days, it has a very honourable history, and allow that CO2 generously gift that CO2 to the green world. And with each in-breath, remember that this oxygen that you need in order to stay alive is being produced by the green plants, and feel gratitude. Feel the gratitude for the life that the green world is passing in your direction. And even within a couple of minutes, the sense of ecological identity can grow. So perhaps if it's a bit unusual for a podcast, but Sarah, let's have a minute of silence while we exchange gases with the green world. And maybe that's enough for now, but I'd like to invite your listeners to try it again for a few more minutes at any time, and maybe, let us know, whether this has done anything for you. I've certainly had the experience of being lost in a big city, having completely lost my sense of purpose and, just confused and bewildered. And a single blade of grass growing up through a crack in the concrete has winked at me, and so I've stopped and shared gases with it for a moment and completely felt myself revitalised and, like having had a really wonderful chiropractic adjustment or something like that. So try it.
Oh, thank you so much. It's I often think of that exercise as one of the things I love about that exercise, the awareness of it, is if you are in when you're working with people who have a trauma, it's often too hard to notice your own breathing, but you can notice the wind and you can notice how the plants are. And so if you can kind of connect to how the plants are breathing, that can help also to re-regulate yourself. If you can't notice your own breathing, you can recognizing and hearing and listening to the plants breathing can do something very similar. It's not exactly the same, but it's very similar because we are one being, and we are all moving and breathing and being breathed together.
Beautiful.
Niamh, is there anything that you want to share as a poem or a remembrance that you want to share?
Yeah, I do actually. I have a poem that I wrote, which I'll read in a sec. But I guess what I was reflecting on is that I wanted to share with the people listening that this kind of work isn't only available to hippies or greenies or, indigenous peoples. It's available to everyone because every human being is part of the earth. And I think as well, when I'm in these spaces, I often hear people who tell stories of how they were super connected to nature as a kid and how they remember how they were always in the ocean or how they were always climbing trees. And that wasn't me. That wasn't my experience. This is something that I came into kind of more slowly as I got older. So yeah, I just wanted to share that because I think there can be this kind of feeling of separation that this kind of work is only available to certain kinds of people. And yeah, it's definitely not. But yeah, I have a poem that actually really captures my coming into deep ecology. I didn't really know that it was called deep ecology at the time. And yeah, it's very like me to have gone off and figured all this out on my own, really, and then through podcasts and through all sorts of learnings, but then realized, oh, there's a whole term called deep ecology. I came up with a whole initiative, and we have to reconnect, and disconnection is the problem, and then they realized there was already the work that reconnects, and there was already these things available. And that made me feel a lot better, because I was like, okay, I'm not alone in this. And there's a whole community of people who have already had these thoughts and have already put these practices in place. So this is a poem that was all about my kind of realizations as I was really coming into, the poem will explain. I thought it was about carbon emissions. I thought it was about asking permission from the government, corporations. Please will you change your labels? Please will you do what's right so that we don't have to fight for the truth? The truth. Everything's so convoluted by those men in suits. Everything's so mishmash, I've got whiplash. Everyone's in cahoots. Everything's so crazy that we can't even eat the fruits off of our own trees. Trees that God put there for you and for me. Trees that provide shade and the air that we breathe. Trees that provide firewood and suck the carbon we don't need. Carbon. Oh, what weight that word doth harbour. The facts and the figures, well, yes, it's important, but all that arguing and all that talk was yet another mirage that hid the problem at large. I thought we could go slowly, at our own pace, picking and choosing what we want to replace. Plastic for paper, dairy for oat, meatless Mondays, whatever floats our boat. But the answers do not lie in upholding the systems, in simply making small changes to reduce our emissions. The answers lie in finding our roots, in being in cahoots with ourselves, with community, in finding strength in our unity, in looking at plants and seeing their beauty, in thanking the trees for doing their duty, in singing and dancing, humming and strumming, in learning and playing, laughing and straying, off the beaten path, into the blue, living in uncertainty, discovering the new, living in discomfort, squirming and struggling to find our wings, like a caterpillar in a cocoon, or a flower about to bloom. Humans are nature. We follow a sequence, we follow a cycle, we thrum to a beat. If not, we get stuck and things start to get tricky. We start to feel stressed and sad and icky. We start to forget we knew the answers all along. We can find them written into ceremony and song. To find our roots, we must take off our boots. The answers are found by putting bare feet on the ground, by hugging the trees and studying the ants, by admiring the leaves and how the bees dance. The answers are found by rooting down and looking up at the stars when we feel a frown, in a warm embrace, in holding space, in connecting to place, instead of this rat race. No, it's not about the carbon emissions. It's about giving ourselves permission to return to the earth, to return to her, to cry, to make art, and to live from the heart. Thanks for listening.
Beautiful, Niamh. Thank you.
Thank you. To live from the heart.
Yeah, just as
Yeah.
as Joanna and John and
I'm so
said.
I'm so uplifted and empowered by young people like you, Niamh. And the last workshop that I did in Melbourne, there was a 16-year-old girl who was co-facilitating for the first time, as long, with and both her parents were, participating in the workshop. It was beautiful. I just, just feel so strengthened and supported by the fact that you're interested in this and growing into this. It's beautiful.
Thank you. Thank you for holding the space for us to be able to do it. I'm excited to continue.
It's one thing to create something, it's quite another to figure out how to pass it on and have other people take up that torch and step aside so that they can, so that we can, and we and they both, I'm in the middle, so it's always both, can carry, right? Like it's not, we have to start the process of stepping aside and helping the ones younger than us all the time. All the time is part of the process. And not everyone does that and can do that. And things die without that. And it changes, of course, it changes. It has to change in order to live. So I so appreciate the modeling of the two of you here, and the demonstration of what does it look like to bring each other along, to for the different generations to be working together, so that the commonality of our work can grow stronger for the thing between us.
And well, I'd just like to say how gracious it was of you, Sarah, to accept my proposal that we include Niamh, and that for the reasons that you've just so eloquently stated, that recognising this.
So, it doesn't matter what field we're in, and what kind of work we do. The work of working between and amidst generations is critical. So as we kind of bring this session to a close, and it feels like bringing a little circle here between us to a close. I'm wondering if maybe we could all take a turn and just like, what are we remembering? What are you remembering in this time that you want to be continuing to bring forth? And if you want to lean into the enchantment, that's also acceptable.
Look like you're looking at me, John.
I am.
Okay. I am remembering my humanity. And in that, I mean trying to forget this capitalist narrative, hustle culture that tells me that the work is always done in front of a computer. And thus trying to remember that the work, all different kinds, is also done while walking or while dancing or while cooking or while in community, and that I need to allow space for that as well. That's what I'm remembering.
Well, thank you. I'm remembering my two most important teachers, the late Arnie Ness, who started the deep ecology movement, and the paper that I read by the sociology professor Bill DeVal called the deep ecology movement, and which I immediately caught a train down to Sydney, borrowed a library card from the university, and spent 2 weeks in the stacks at the university reading through every footnote, and then haranguing everybody about deep ecology. But as Arnie Ness said, ecological ideas are of no use without ecological identity. And so then 3 years later, meeting Joanna Macy, attending one of her workshops and realising that here was the missing piece, that this person held the spiritual technology that allowed deep ecology to turn into an experience rather than an idea, an experience that generated ecological identity. And so here at this cusp of the departure of Joanna Macy, I just feel this incredible gratitude. How about you, Sarah? What are you remembering?
I'm also remembering that sense of I those early memories with Joanna and the women who introduced me to Joanna, who are also no longer with us, in my Quaker community in California, which played a very critical role in her life. And there was like many cycles, many circles. And just recently, she played a very critical role in one of my very close spiritual companion's life. So there's just, there's this web, and it's, kind of what you said, Niamh, which is so beautiful and so correct, of like, we have these realizations and we do our own work, and then we find like, oh, there's this other person who's like developed this whole thing. And we don't have to make it all up ourselves, right? And we don't have to figure it all out by ourselves. And often when I'm working with individuals and people, the earth keeps speaking to us of these messages. It keeps showing us these messages. And our great ideas are not given to us alone. They're given to the collective. And each of us might have a particular role to play given our particular context. But like the deep web between us is a web in which so much of this reconnection keeps bubbling up again and again. And it can be easy to not remember these teachers and so many people, including yourself, John, who have laid the foundation for other people to pick things up and then who keep innovating with those foundational pieces, and who, like that process, I know has been so important in so many people's like kind of building their identity, because the work of building identity, you had to bring a lot of pieces together, right? It's not just one piece. It's a hugeness, it's a wholeness, and it's quite expansive. And so I feel very much remembering like, oh yeah, it's so important to keep lifting up those teachers and those who come before us, even as our own work keeps shifting and changing and, adapting to the needs of our understanding, limited as it is. So for the web of teachers who come before, and the web of teachers who will come after.
For the web.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you very much, each of you.
Yeah, thanks so much, Sarah. That was beautiful.
Yeah, thank you.